Welcome to you all at our service this morning. We come here again to enter into an altered state, a state of consciousness outside the everyday, a contemplative state, a state of stillness and calm, a state of reverence for life in all its forms and all its expressions, a state in which chaos is no longer our enemy. Let our chalice flame now be lit as a beacon of light in the darkness of chaos. Thank you, Jen. You may feel that for all its beauty, the music I chose for the prelude, which I included in the time of the service because I wanted you to hear it, contradicted our intention to create a mood of calm, of which I just spoke. For it is full of discord and dissonance, and consequently disturbing and unsettling, spooky even. It represents chaos, the chaos before the world was created, according to the scriptures. Disorder, out of which we are told God created the heaven and earth. That is order. Chaos and order are polarities. Without intending to usurp God's role, do we not also attempt to create order out of chaos? Are we not also faced with dissonance and strive for harmony? Utopians may believe that this is a struggle we can win, but the writers of Scripture apparently believe that even God lacked this power, or at least, if he had it, chose not to exercise it. For without a degree of chaos, there can be no free will, no freedom of thought and action. A perfectly ordered world would be one in which our thoughts and actions would be predetermined, as indeed many Christians at one time believed, and some still do. Christianity, as indeed other religions, got into a great muddle over this question, coming to a head in the 16th century when John Calvin preached the concept of predestination in Geneva. According to this doctrine, God created good and bad people. The first would be saved, The second, though they played a role in God's plan, were destined to be dispatched to the eternal torment of hell. This seemed to many, and especially to Unitarians, unbelievably unjust, and so they didn't believe it, and embraced the notion of universal salvation. All would be saved, though some might need a spell in that corrective institution called purgatory to prepare them for a heavenly life. For most people in the West today, theological concepts and the disputes around them are as meaningless as questions about how many angels can dance on the point of a needle. But these old debates reflect genuine questions which humans have reflected on ever since they emerged from their nearest primate ancestors. Thrust willy-nilly into consciousness, they were bound to think about their existence and their place in the universe. And one of the riddles they puzzled over was why people are so different from one another. It may not always be a question of good or bad, but, for example, of calmness and restlessness. Some people are calm, some are restless. Two ministers in the history of Hastings Unity Church, which I am at present writing a book about, were in this respect as different as chalk and cheese. William Birks stayed with that congregation for 2.5 years, during which time the church was built. Denby Hilton served his flock for more than half a century. Birks was an old-fashioned biblical Unitarian, Hilton a radical modernist. What made them so different? And what conclusions might we draw from these when thinking about human difference? Let us sing our first hymn about pilgrimage. Are we not all on a pilgrimage? Hymn number 150, the Pilgrim's Hymn. Let him come hither. One here will constant be. Come, wind, come hither. There's no discouragement shall make him once relent his first avowed intent to be a pilgrim. Whoso beset him round with dismal stories, do but themselves confound, his strength the more is. No lion can him fight, he'll with a giant fight, but he will have a right to be a pilgrim. Hobgoblin nor foul fiend can daunt his spirit. He knows that at the end shall life inherit. Then fancies flee away, he'll fear not what they say. He'll labor night and day to be a pilgrim. William Berks commenced his ministry at Battle and Hastings. He actually had responsibility for Battle as well as Hastings, on Sunday, the 31st of March, 1867. The Hastings congregation at that stage was still meeting in the market room at the Swan Hotel, whereas the Battle congregation had existed as a Unitarian church since about 1820. And they met at the Swan Hotel, but during this time, Hastings Unitarian Church was built, and it opened its doors on the 6th of May, 1868. William Berks came from a Derbyshire family in which there were 3 generations of Unitarian ministers. The first minister of this surname, the first Unitarian minister of this surname, was the father of the Hastings minister, who was also called William. Born in 1806 at Ashover, Derbyshire, into a Wesleyan family, William Sr. discovered the writings of the American writer William Emery Channing and became a Unitarian, and was given the charge of the chapels of Flagg and Great Hucklow. Some of you know the latter place. It was William Sr.'s express wish that his 3 sons should follow him into the Unitarian ministry. And this wish became in due course an accomplished fact, though not without a little coercion. William Berks Jr.'s loyal and long-suffering wife, Jane Elliott Berks, wrote an account of his life and her part in it for her children. She wrote an account for her children. She started by telling them how their grandfather became a minister. I quote, "When the Reverend William Berks, Senior of Flagg, was very ill, he called his son William to his bedside and said, 'You must do my duty.' And though at first William Jr. said he could not, he was persuaded and then coached into reading a sermon. Everybody was very sympathetic and encouraged him, so he carried on until his father's death around 1860, and for some little time after that. He had only just turned 17 when he broke off his ministry to study for the ministry. William Jr.'s elder brother, John, was studying at the Unitarian Home Missionary Board, later called Unitarian College Magister, which is where Jennifer, by the way, studied. And probably with his help, William Jr. entered the college as well. And at the end of his training, he was sent to Hastings to conduct services there. Let us now hear a little more, quite a bit actually, of Jane Berks's story. After 2 years at Hastings, my husband, she's talking about William Jr., of course, my husband, tired of the place, which was also too relaxing for his mother, who lived with them there. And he came and preached at Topsham in Devon, surely a quieter place than Hastings. After 2 years there, he went to Gloucester, where he remained between 4 and 5 years. Then came Kendal, William's last ministry as a bachelor. After we got married, we went to live at Stannington near Sheffield, but that was too countrified for him to stay longer, although the whole congregation begged him to do so. At Xmas, we moved to Wolverhampton, where there was a large open field in front of our house and a lovely view across 20 miles of country with the Wrekin in the background. We must have been there about 3 years before we moved to Stroud in Gloucestershire. It was a very pretty chapel and a beautiful neighbourhood with a rather select congregation. My uncle said when he came to see us, "I think Mr. Berks will stay here." But he didn't. However, it was too quiet for him as well, and he was eager to live and preach in a large town again. St. Thomas Street, Portsmouth, becoming vacant, he agreed to take it on. With our third child, Hilda, a small baby of about 6 months, we were off again. After that came High Street, Portsmouth, the oldest nonconformist chapel in the city, and at one time a fashionable one, we have been told, with many carriages drawing up outside. After 5 years at Portsmouth, we went to Banbury, a pretty chapel lying back in its own grounds with ornamental gates in front. It was here that my son, Ernest, developed severe abscesses, and we sought the advice of a very clever doctor who recommended we move to the seaside. So off we went to Sunderland. We had very little salary there, but many good friends, including a Mrs. Bunnup, whose house was our children's second home, and also Mr. Rutherford, the Sunderland editor of the Newcastle Daily Leader, and his wife. I was very happy among them, but the pay being really insufficient, William managed to get Aberdeen about 2 years later. So much to my regret, we were again moved on. By this time, Ernest was strong and full of life, and I shall never forget when we moved into Maybank, Aberdeen, our new home, his running to me with an armful of rope and shouting, "Where shall I put this, Mama? Ready for when we move next time." In addition to several gifts, we had testimonials from Banbury and Sunderland, but somehow William never would take care of these illuminated addresses and always said, "Oh, don't worry about them, they don't matter." The Scotch people were not so easy to understand, and so William fell out with them. One day he announced he was going to give up his ministry there. "But," I said, "we have nowhere else in view." "I don't care," he said, "I'll soon get something." This greatly disturbed me, as there were too many little mouths to feed. They eventually had 9 children. His Aberdeen notice expired about 5 weeks after John was born, and by the end of 6 weeks, we were on the way to London as first-class passengers on a steamboat. I don't quite know why they didn't take the train, because there were plenty of trains by then. We had no idea what was before us, but with William's usual hopefulness, he saw the prospects as rosy. Supplying as a minister in London was not plentiful, however. Then began the selling of our personal property to make ends meet. Whilst living at Lee in southeast London, we sent May to Channing House School, as she wanted to be a nurse. The Channing House School is a Unitarian school, founded by the daughter of the person who founded Hastings Unitarian Church, more or less. But she had never been strong, and she was not really fit to leave home. That is May. Later, she was very ill, and the doctor gave her 18 months to live. She said, that is, May said, she wanted to go home, meaning Portsmouth. So we moved down to our property, Wanstead Villa in Villiers Road, Portsmouth. Then William bought some property in Clarendon Road, and Gilbert was born there. But at this time, William was in York, a 6 months renewable engagement, and as soon as Gilbert was big enough for me to travel, we followed him there. As it turned out, William's engagement was renewed 3 times because of a dispute about who should be the permanent minister. On leaving York, we came back to Portsmouth and lived on supply money. By this time, Wanstead Villa was sold, as well as our other property, until it was all gone, bar a few pounds. Last of all, we went to Diss, where we spent nearly 12 years. That was by far the longest ministry he ever had. Then came May's death after 3 months in the London hospital, together with my bad arm, and after that, the First World War and all its horrors and anxieties. 2 of our boys were in France, and we didn't know from day to day what we might hear. Meanwhile, William was now partly helpless with paralysis, and Trishy was in London with Hilda in all the Zeppelin raids. Ernest was at the Crystal Palace with the Air Force. William then suffered a breakdown, and we removed to Bournemouth. But as no house was to be got, we returned to Ernest's and our new house in Wickham Road, Fareham. At last came peace from war, William's death in 1921, and my ill health. Both Hilda and Gilbert underwent operations, and finally there was the shock of Ernest's passing on. Jane now is writing in the present. She says, amidst all this, the greatly valued kindness shown me by my old friends and the many pleasures given me by my children have helped me to pass the time I have left with you all. There have been so many of you and so many anxieties that I have not been able to do half of what I would have liked to have done. Our next hymn is another traditional one. In number 101, Dear Lord and Father. Lord and Father, give our in pure lives thy service find, in deeper reverence praise, in deeper reverence praise. In simple trust like theirs, who have beside the Saviour's the Lord, let us like them without a word rise up and follow thee. Rise up and follow thee. O Sebastians by Galilee, O come of winds above, Jesus knelt to share with thee the silence of eternity, interpreted by love, interpreted by love. With that deeper subduing all our words and works that draw, the tender whisper of thy coolness noiseless, let thy blessings fall, and fill thy manna down, as fell thy manna down. Drop thy still dews of quietness, till all our strivings cease. our souls thus strain and stress, and let our modern life confess the beauty of thy peace, the beauty of thy peace. Denby Hilton's father, James Hilton, was as restless as William Burke's Jr. But the reason can be guessed at rather more easily. He was born in Bolton around 1881, probably to Sarah E. Hilton, single, milliner, 23-year-old daughter of another James Hilton, bookmaker and clogger, and his wife, another Sarah. They were all living at 98 Folds Road at the time of the 1881 census, with James Jr., a newborn baby, appearing as the grandson of James Sr. By 1891, James Jr. was living in Oldham as the adopted son of Howarth and Elizabeth Duff. But in 1894, Howarth Duff died, removing another source of stability in his life. Around that time, aged 13, James started to work as a clerk. Though common, illegitimacy, if such it was, and I have no proof, was in those days regarded as scandalous. And indeed, the word illegitimacy itself implies this. Though his adoptive parents may have done their best to hide the truth from him, the trauma of being separated from his mother is likely to have haunted him for the rest of his life. And it was a short life. He married Denby's mother, Hannah, when he was only 20, and she a couple of years older. He no doubt wanted her as an anchor, but if so, she was an anchor that was dragged. From now on, she was more of a pilot as they set out on a roller coaster existence. They first moved to Conway, where James became the landlord at the Red Lion Inn, and Denby's older brother, Colin, was born. Raise this a little bit. I can't do it, never mind. Can you raise this just slightly? Raise it. Yeah. Great, that'll help. Yeah, thanks. I'm missing my words sometimes. Right, that's fine. Thank you. Yeah. A year later, James took on the license of the Parade Hotel, Llandudno, while living at Colwyn Bay, 5 miles away. It was here that Denby was born on 15th of November 1903. Then it was back to Bolton in 1904, where James became the landlord at Nine House Tavern, and where Denby's younger brother Alan was born. They lived there for 5.5 years, and then James and Hannah decided to open a confectionery shop. Meanwhile, 3 of the boys started school in Bolton, and Denby's youngest brother, Horace, was born. There were no sisters. Confectionery sales seem not to have flourished, for in 1912, the family were back off to Wales, this time to Ruthin, where James took on the license of the Eagle, and Colin, Denby, and Alan were enrolled in an excellent national, that is, Anglican school. But either because cash was short or simply because James was footloose, he applied for at least one temporary license, this time in Derby, the family staying in Ruthin. In 1915, it was up sticks again to Blackpool, where James took on the license of the prestigious Castle Gardens Hotel in Carlton. The family may have felt the further upheaval was worth it, now that James had apparently found a post in which he could feel comfortable. The 3 older boys were enrolled in another school, and Horace probably started his education. But within 8 months, James died at an isolation hospital of typhoid, possibly after eating infected oysters from nearby Morecambe Bay. He was only 35. Despite his restless personality and the disruption it caused to their lives, I feel sure his wife and the boys loved him, and it must have been a terrible shock and a misery to them. Hannah was now left with a fearful responsibility. 4 young lads, Colin aged 14, Denby 13, Alan 9, and Horace 4, needed some kind of security to keep them on the straight and narrow. The only sensible solution seemed to be returned to Bolton, where there was family to help. Hannah did a magnificent job making a home for the boys and ensuring their ongoing education at, for 3 of them, their 4th school. It is, I think, no accident that Denby's wife, Muriel, and his mother, Hannah, later became very close. They had a common object: to make a secure home. In Anna's case, it was for her children. In Muriel's, it was for Denby alone, for they had no children. Writing in the 1950s, Muriel reflected in a sketch called Christmas Holiday on a visit she and Denby made to Bolton before the war. I quote, "My husband's mother and I were sitting together before the fire, which burned brightly in the kitchen range. The other members of the family had braved the typical Lancashire weather and gone to the cinema, but we were more than content to stay at home, reveling in the warmth and comfort of the fireside as the rain beat relentlessly against the window pane." And the subject of food then came up. My northern mother knows that, and she called her mother, by the way, my northern mother knows about the necessity of good, simple cooking. Sorry, I'll read that again. My northern mother knows more about the necessity of good, simple cooking than most women, for she was left with 4 small boys at an early age in those good old days when no widow's pension or state aid of any kind existed. Let me now pose this question to you. If you had had the kind of upbringing which Denby experienced in his early youth and adolescence, what would have been your most fervent wish? We'll come back to this in the address. Over the next 18 years, Denby left the Church of England, became a Unitarian, discovered his artistic ability, launched an art club, worked for years at a factory, became a pioneer preacher, and finally trained for the ministry. Few biographies of ministers in the 19th century, and well into the 20th, adequately acknowledge the important role played by their wives. Roles which went far beyond helping out with the running of the church. It was often they who kept the ship afloat when their husbands were at risk of losing their sense of direction and proportion. By coincidence, both Berks and Hilton are exceptions in this case. Jane Berks, as we've seen, told us all about her life with William. And rather less systematically, but touchingly, Muriel Hilton described the marital bliss which, despite their childlessness, she enjoyed with Denby. Christine will now read a few examples of what she wrote in her epigrammatic style.
The best sound. A friend of mine called in for a cup of tea, and as we were chatting, she suddenly asked, "Now, what do you think is the best sound of all?" I know and have known for many years the most lovely and welcome sound, but I wanted to hear what my friend had to say. The best sound, she declared, is the tinkle of a cup of tea on a saucer. I remember when I was in hospital and was coming out of anaesthetic that I heard the other patients receiving their afternoon cups of tea, and it seemed the most normal, friendly, and inviting sound in the world. It sounds good at any time of the day or night, she added. I agreed that it was a most delightful sound. At that moment, I heard my husband open our wooden gate, and then the sound of his footsteps approaching home. That, I said, is the best sound in the world to me. The joy of touch, according to Muriel, is the grip of a baby's fingers round one's own, or the touch of my husband's hand in mine. She describes the joy of smell as my husband's leather chair, my husband's Harris tweed coat. Finally, Muriel's thoughts on the 40s. I have heard it said that the 40s are the most difficult years of one's life. I am climbing that particular part of the journey, and speaking as a woman, I can well understand all that has been said about it. The first gay flush of youth is but a memory. One no longer cherishes illusions about oneself, and the years ahead cannot be filled with the excitement of the past. The way is to some extent defined. Children are no longer dependent upon the parents. In many cases, they have left home altogether, and the mother especially, no longer finding her hands full, has to look about her for other interests. In my case, my husband and I are alone, and we are indeed fortunate, for companionship has become more sweet with the passing of time. But there is a danger of repetition blurring the wonder of every day. That is the main thing to avoid. And for that reason, I am never going to lose my sense of the magic of common things.
Thank you, Christine. The Magic of Common Things was the title Muriel chose for the book from which those passages came. Now let us move to a time of contemplation, and staying with Muriel, we'll use a sketch called The Little Church, which is how she always referred to the Hastings place of worship. All tender thoughts of beauty and of joy dwell in this house of quietness apart. Here starlit dreams of unity and peace live in the depths of every human heart. So grant to those within this house of thine a refuge from the world of bitter strife. May all who seek the shining path of truth be worthy heirs of thy great gift of life. Let us now be silent. Thank you, Kathy. We're now going to sing a hymn before the address, number 126, In Their Ancient Isolation. Ancient isolation, since framed their moral codes, and the peoples of each nation profess solitary roads. While the distances are shrinking, and the printed page, all as many lands are linking, spreading knowledge of each sage. Now new times demand new measures, and ways we must explore. Let each faith bring its own treasures to enrich the common store. When no more will creeds divide us, though we love our own the best. For the light of unit guide us as we join in common quest. We differ from one another, firstly, because we are genetically different. The exception proves the rule. Identical twins, of course, are not genetically different. And they are remarkably similar, not only in appearance, but in behavior. Secondly, comes experience, our experience, especially of early life. And that is undoubtedly a very important factor in forming who we are. And because we have different experiences, of course, we are different from one another. I venture to suggest that William Burke's and Denby Hilton were different in character because of their different experiences in early life. But there is a third factor in human difference, which is a global difference, and that is the different cultures into which we're born. They also play a very important part in global difference. William Burke's, I surmise, suffered from having a dominant father and a rather weaker mother. Deprived of the freedom to choose his own career, and perhaps insufficiently supported in his own wishes by his mother, I suspect, was dogged with a perpetual sense of opportunities missed. Each new ministry promised the fulfillment of his wishes and fell short in turn, with possible exceptions of Banbury and Diss, where he might have settled but couldn't. The result was that his long-suffering wife and 9 children were dragged from pillar to post for many years in a way similar to the fate of James Hilton's wife and children. I asked you what you would most have wished for if you had had Denby's upbringing. I expected that you would choose words like stability peace, domesticity, and serenity. Am I right? Yep. Some are nodding, yes. I wonder what you would have answered if I'd asked you the same question about William Burke's. What was it, if not genetics, which made him such a restless soul? Was it because of a dominant, controlling father and perhaps a weaker mother, as I've suggested? Or was it sibling rivalry with his more stable elder brother, who was more prominent in Unitarian circles, which drove him vainly in an endless search for peace and tranquility? We could speculate forever and never be sure of the truth, for how can you prove such theories, especially if there's no documentary evidence, such as diaries and letters, and even they may mislead. What we may agree upon, however, is that even if we can't find the reasons for both Denby and William's character formation, such causes will exist. Does this mean then that they had no choice in the matter of who they became? Were they from an early age destined to be the way they were, just as John Calvin said back in the 16th century? If you reflect on your own character, how much of it do you think is fixed, and how much might you still change? And if you decide that you are in charge of your character and could make of it what you want, how much of that belief is an emotional response, and how much of it is objective? The effect of culture as a factor in human difference is much greater than many wish to acknowledge. Consider, for example, the traditional Muslim view of a good society. This consists of him or her, of an environment in which religious rites are performed, in which religious teaching is adhered to, in which defense of the faith is a duty, in which gender roles are clearly defined, in which sexual deviation is regarded as sinful, and in which freedom of speech is limited to the extent that the other goods or values are protected. How do we know that they are right? How do we know that they are wrong or backward and that we are right? The usual answer is our morality is based on reason, theirs is based on superstition. I suggest to you that that argument falls apart the moment you begin to scrutinize it. Sigmund Freud wrote that our intellect, I quote, can function reliably only when it is removed from the influence of strong emotional impulses. Otherwise, it behaves merely as an instrument. In other words, if the subject under consideration is emotional, and the difference between us and traditional Muslim society is certainly that, we use our reason to reach the conclusions we want, rather than those which are suggested by the evidence. On a personal level, we may look back on our behavior towards someone and find ourselves faced with a choice between telling ourselves that we were unkind or of concluding that the person concerned was to blame for the harm done to them. We will certainly be tempted to choose the latter explanation. Moreover, this manipulation of the truth may happen at an unconscious level. There is, however, a way out of this self-deception. Since humankind emerged from the other primates and developed a level of consciousness which became unbearable without some resolution, religion has provided the higher consciousness, the avoidance of self-deception required for what Buddhists call detachment. Bobby Burns called it seeing ourselves as others see us. Christians have always recognized this ability, while combining it, as most religions do, with a narrative, a legend of physical salvation. How otherwise would the most startling of Jesus' injunctions, that we should love our enemies, be possible? Only by putting ourselves imaginatively in our enemy's shoes is such a thing conceivable. How would it be, for example, if we stopped demonizing Putin and Hamas and tried to imagine what it is like to be a Russian or a Palestinian? So-called rationalists are affronted that religious people should claim the high ground when it comes to rationality. But they also are full of self-deception. Do they not have a faith in human nature's capacity to create a perfect world, which contradicts the experience of thousands of years? Do they not claim, contrary to Freud, that many others whom he acknowledged, contrary to Freud and many others whom he acknowledged, that reason is reliable in emotional as well as in practical matters? And there I conclude my address, and we'll sing another hymn. Hymn number 226, Song of Peace. This is my song, O God of all the nations, the song of peace for lands afar and wide. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, thou God of all the nations, the song of peace for their land and for mine. Words by Muriel Hilton. Some people ask me why I go to my little church each Sunday. Those with whom I worship, with whom I pray, sing hymns and listen to eternal truths, those with whom I share the silences in a service, become part of the mystical union with God and myself. I go from church with fresh insight, new vision, and renewed endeavour. Ordinary things, if touched with the devotion which comes from worship, can shine with lustre and significance. And I think that's a nice way to end.